just doing the London recap for today. So I didn't take any trades personally on EU and AU. Price action still pretty indecisive overall, which we'll go through from sort of the daily down. And there were some potential opportunities, but nothing that I really wanted to risk my capital on. So I just sat on the sidelines. This sort of price action is pretty typical of what can happen sort of in the lead up to NFP. So yeah, it's better to just be slightly more conservative as opposed to aggressive in these sort of conditions, in my opinion. But start with the daily and EU anyway, and then we'll run through it. So let me remove all these alerts before they start going off during the video. So yeah, in the daily, pretty much for the last 7-8 days we've just been sort of had this sort of pullback, which obviously makes sense following the bearish break of structure. So obviously here we know it can go either way. We could possibly come up and mitigate the EQ here before potentially continuing bearish, or we could just tank from here, because as we know, price doesn't always have to do what we want it to do, but there is a very good chance for continuing up to here. So on the daily, a lot of indecision. It's not really clear which way it's going to go, but we know it could go either way as well. So yeah, nothing massively clear in the daily, just sort of trying to use the information to remain neutral in the lower time frames. On the 4 hour then, obviously 4 hour is still bearish. This is our swing high, this is our swing low. The internal structure following the break of structure, again we're getting the pullback. It's just the daily pullback, sort of you get both slightly more to work with in the 4 hour. I have the internal bullish following this break of structure here. We mitigated this supply, swept this liquidity, and then had a pretty sharp move to the downside on Friday. So at that point I was thinking it was very likely that this liquidity was going to get smashed and we were going to get a new low. But the extreme of the demand range held, that wick refinement. So this is still our strong internal low. And see, we got a lot of bullish momentum to the upside as well, which suggests that the internal trend might continue. This week internal high might get run, and we might come up here to mitigate the EQ of the daily and 4 hour legs. So yeah, overall I probably favour buys, but yeah, a lot of can tank from here because we're obviously in this supply that caused the bearish chalk, so it's not beyond the realms possibility that we could tank from here. But pretty much all week we've just been ranging around the EQ of the internal leg, which again, it just signals indecision. The price doesn't really want to commit either way. You can see here, like, we pushed up straight away, retraced, swept these sort of equal lows, pushed up, failed to close above here, and then retraced again. So again, it's just indecision. It could go either way. But coming into session this morning, we had this demand that basically caused price to wick this high. Obviously the internal is bullish overall, so yeah, coming into session I probably did favour buys if the setup in the M15, but then just being aware that with the daily and the 4 hour there is sort of indecision clearly visible, sort of range around the EQ, price sort of struggling to break highs, sort of tells you that neither side is in control and we're sort of waiting for one side to show which way it's going to go. And then on the M15, again, typical of the indecision, we had the bearish IBOS yesterday here, and then I had the internal and the swing bearish. So at this point I was thinking, right, we'll look for sells, target the weekend 15 low, but obviously price just shot straight back up, and then we got a bullish IBOS, but we mitigated this refined M10 supply. This high is strong in the M15 but it's weak in the 4 hour, so it could hold but it could easily be run with the 4 hour taking precedent. So coming into session this morning, obviously had the internal bullish following this IBOS. You see a decent amount of momentum to the upside there, and then we had this sort of pretty corrective pullback into the 4 hour demand. So again, probably favoured buys coming into session. The main POI that I wanted to trade from was here, because you can see it's the wick, it swept liquidity, it mitigated the extreme, and it had a bit of inducement in front of it, so it ticked a lot of the boxes. That was the main one that I wanted to get hit if I was to drop straight down to the M1 and look for entries. Obviously the larger internal is bullish following this IBOS, but you can see here in the pullback we have these sort of ranges being respected. So the smaller internal was bearish, so for this reason, yes, the internal is bullish overall, the larger internal, but the smaller internal is bearish. So for this reason, yes, you can still take longs from in here if you get an M15 shock, but you just have to be careful of trading against this here, because obviously this could just sustain and the ranges keep being respected, so you never really want to presume that that is going to change until it does. So I'll just use bar replay here to go back to the sort of pre-session. Yeah, so this was sort of 6:30 in the mornings. This was pre-session whenever we were doing our analysis. You can see we had the bullish M15 chalk there, so that gave us this demand to trade from, which was good. Played on. The only issue was that by the time price pulled back into this demand, by the time we mitigated that, we had also mitigated this. So yes, overall I probably favour buys, but I don't want to be trading directly against this supply, as yes, we had the bullish chalk, but the smaller internal structure takes precedent for me. This is a more significant range than that little chalk. So I was aware that that chalk may have just been to facilitate the mitigation of that, and that we could have continued lower to potentially come in down here, which was where I wanted to trade from. So for that reason, I didn't really want to be aggressive within this demand. I was sort of happy to wait and see if this demand held, and then sort of we got bullish IBOS, supply failure, and then maybe start looking to play the pullback that way. There was a potential entry within here that I'll go through in the M1, but yeah, I was happy enough to leave it alone, to be honest. It was a very aggressive entry model, and it just overall wasn't an area that I want to be aggressive. Play it on and see, push into demand starts being respected. And you can see how pretty just overall indecisive this price action is. Like, you know, there's large wicks in each direction. Like, you know, you ideally want to see sort of clear commitment where, you know, you get a lot of bullish candles in a row, just sort of signal that demand is in control here, but we didn't really have that. So ideally at this point I wanted to see the bullish II boss, which is basically a close above there, before looking to get long. You can see price wicked it here, which again gave us this demand is valid. It caused this supply range to get wicked. Then you can see like that demand, it failed to even close above that high. So like it's not really demand I want to be trading from, like considering the price action isn't convincing overall. Yes, it's valid, look for a buy within there, but just when price failed to close above there, I just sort of thought that might be a liquidity grab, so I was sort of happy enough to sit in my hands and sort of watch it play out. That's just me. I'm more conservative. You might want to be more aggressive and see we pull straight back into it. I think there was a potential entry within that, but again we wicked the high again, which again doesn't really instill much bullish confidence in me. Then we finally get the close above, and then when you start looking at demand here, that is already mitigated there by that wick. So the demand that caused price to close above here is actually those wicks. So then again, you can look for price to pull back into that. But again, before doing so, we mitigated this here. You see that sell to buy gets engulfed, a lot of momentum come into the market. It's within this larger range, and also one thing that's worth noting is that this range is more significant in size than this one. So if you were to go up to the 1 hour, you can see that this was basically just a 1 hour chalk, and this was a more significant range, and you can see we mitigated the 1 hour inside bar within that range as well. So for that reason, again, plenty of reason to be cautious. Just because we had mitigated this was the more significant range. So again, it was possible that this was basically just being used as inducement for this, and the price is going to continue lower, because you have to remember too, we are still bearish overall. That's our swing high. But yeah, so for that reason, just plenty of reason to be cautious, and then pull back into it, get a bit of a move away, fail to take out the high, and then ultimately failed. So yeah, I'll drop down to that one now, but you can just see how overall wicky and corrective that piece of price action is. It's just not really price action that I want to be aggressive with. If we'd got like a convincing II boss with a decent amount of momentum, then I would have started looking for that there. But just overall price struggling, break highs, lots of wicks. I was just overall happy to be more cautious, especially considering the 4 hour and the daily weren't that clear sort of which way they were going to go. I'll just drop down to the M1 now to go through the M1 price action. So yeah, this is the M15 demand that caused the bullish M15 shock. Then obviously the issue was, you can see we had rejected this little M1 refinement within the M15 supply that was within this sort of range that caused the II boss. So didn't want to be trading against that. I know some of you has left basically a risk entry on that demand there. That's absolutely madness to me. It's way too aggressive, because Yes, we had the bullish chalk, but the small internal structure was bearish, and we had mitigated the supply range, so it's very conceivable price could have just tanked. I think obviously everyone's free to trade their own way. People are going to be more aggressive than me, but that's just way too low probability for me. And if you're taking trades like that, I think you really need to track them over sort of a larger sample size and see if they're worth taking. There was then potentially the M1 confirmation entry, where we mitigated the M1 refinement within the M15 demand, and then see we got a bit of a V shape, and then pulled back into it, and then pushed up. But again, it's just a chalk. Yes, we had the liquidation. We're still sort of contained in this larger range, so we could easily have just sort of tanked, particularly as we were coming off the M15 supply range. Yeah, personally, the entry model is just too aggressive for me. I didn't want to be that aggressive in this overall area because I was aware that the supply range could hold. Yeah, but then finally, sort of, we got the closure above sort of the refinement. We wicked at the sort of high of the M15 supply range. So at that point, you could say, right, now it's worth being a bit more aggressive. So we have this demand here, which again, I personally wasn't a fan of because price failed to even close. I'll just go out to the M15 again, just to remind you. You know, price failed to even take out this high. It didn't close above that high. It was barely engulfed, huge wick. It just wasn't really a POI where I wanted to be aggressive personally. But again, that's just me. But you might want to be more aggressive. And then you see, you got the push up, got a bit of a flip, failed reaction and shock, and then basically price pulled back in there, which was pretty clean entry. But again, this was already mitigated by this wick. So personally, if I was to enter there, I probably would have entered on the flip, and questionable whether it was stayed in. But yeah, it makes sense to enter there. It's extreme, even though it was already mitigated. Then obviously that would have played out quite nicely today, but just overall wasn't a fan of the price action in the M15. And then at this point, come into this M15 demand. It is the demand that caused basically price to close above the high, but again, it's only wicks, so it's not the best POI in the world, not really one where I want to be aggressive. See, we come into it, get the liquidation here, pretty nice equal lows there, got the chalk, pushed up, got the flip that swept, and then pushed up. So again, it's more than valid to enter here. It was outside. It was during the London lull. It was just after 10 o'clock, and it's not ideal. The price sort of came close to this high and failed to take it out. You sort of, if you're going to get in there, you sort of want price to tag in there, and then sort of you get to break even before you get to there, and then if it fails, you don't take a loss. So not ideal to leave the entry on there, but yeah, it is valid. Yeah, and then just overall in the M15 just wasn't a fan because we had mitigated obviously the larger range and sort of the sell to buy wicks within it, which was obviously a 1 hour range and the 1 hour refinement within it. So it was possible we were going to roll over to the downside at this point. So again, I was happy enough to just be conservative at this point, but look, there were a few potential entries there. I was happy enough just to leave it alone given the higher time frames. The M15 being messy overall. But move on to AU now. So obviously daily's bearish, mitigated supply in the premium. So the expectation at this point is that this low will probably get run. The larger internal is still bullish. That is sort of the larger demand range that caused this IBOS, but this demand range was pretty significant. We got a close below, which is pretty significant in my eyes. I'd be more inclined to just focus on this piece of price action as opposed to this at this point. Then say we got the close below, we pulled back into the flip zone and we've pushed lower. So I would say we might get a decent reaction from this demand, but at this point I'd say it's very likely this low is going to get run. So yeah, from the daily, massively favour sells. 4 hours trending quite nicely now at this stage. Had another break of structure here. That's our strong high, that's our weak low, so this gives us our range. Following the break of structure, we expect a pullback. Obviously, if this sort of supply at the EQ of the leg, or that supply in the premium to look for continuation. So yeah, following the break structure, can expect a pullback. So I was sort of happy enough in the M15 to sort of look for buys to sort of target up towards here if the setup. But at the same time, remembering that it is counter trend on the 4 hour and the 4 hour and the daily. So not one to be too aggressive. Sorry, let me delete this. So then coming to charts this morning, it's actually looking pretty clean at this stage. We had the sort of, you could count it as an II boss if you wish, but I was just sort of counting it as a shock. So at this point I was sort of thinking, right, maybe pull back into here and then look to play the pullback, but obviously a decent amount of momentum at this point, so new price didn't have to do that. Now we'll just play it on. Price is sort of range round now at this point. So here I was sort of thinking, waiting to see if you got like another sort of II boss here to sort of look for price to pull back into demand here to play the pullback. But ideally you want it down here, but obviously the market doesn't also have to do what we want it to do. And you can see sort of at this point, see that price action is pretty indecisive. You know, bearish candle, price struggling to break the highs. Like, it's basically just you can see by reading the 15 minutes price action, you can tell that on the 1 minute it's pretty much like that there. You know, it's not, you know, ideally you want to see something like that there, sort of clear momentum, whereas there's just no sign of massive bullish intent at that point. Yeah, we mitigated this sort of wick there, which again makes sense because there was enough demand in it to cause price to close above that. Wasn't interested in a sell from there. Just overall not a massive fan of the POI. No inducement in the leg, didn't sweep liquidity. It's not quite within the previous sort of 4 hour range, which was here. Yeah, just not a massive fan of looking down there. I would want to have seen an M15 shock. Much preferred this one here, as that POI, it swept liquidity, it has inducement there. It's within this sort of range, it's within this range, and it's within this range, which are obviously all POIs on higher time frames, so much preferred there, or even ideally here. That's the flip zone, a bit of inducement in front of it, nestled within the 4 hour. That's sort of where I wanted to get aggressive, looking for sales in the M1. Then see again, pull it back in. It's just no sign of, like, you know, highs and lows getting wicked. High there, low there, just no sign of any real intent, so nothing I would really want to trade from there. Again, like, you can drop down, you can try and force it on M15 demands or whatever, but personally I'm just happy to stick to the super obvious POIs at this stage, because I know they have the highest probability and the highest strike rate. Yeah, so perfectly happy to sit in my hands, and as I keep sort of emphasising, that I do take a more hands-off approach with AU. You know, I try to be maybe a bit more aggressive, taking sort of aggressive short-term trades in EU, but with the AU try to just stick to the super obvious POIs. On the M1, pretty much nothing to show. You can see here we come into this sort of crappy M15 POI that I wasn't a big fan of, and yes, we got the reaction from it, but the reaction was just to pull back into demand to basically continue higher, which is why I was basically waiting for the M15 chalk. So again, we got the chalk here, had a bit of a flip there too, so could have entered either on the extreme, which would have been, I wouldn't have recommended leaving an order there after mitigating the demand anyway, but the flip as well, which ended up holding, so you could have entered there. Maybe you could have got it to break even before it came into the demand here, but overall just not a fan of the price action. Yeah, I was just happy to wait for the clearer price action setup, whether that was this M15 POI up here or like an M15 shock here, where I can then sort of follow the bearish order flow. But yeah, that's EU and AU. No trades myself. Is a pretty indecisive price action in EU, which is pretty typical of what happens coming up to NFP, because usually with NFP you get the massive sweeps of liquidity in either direction and then get the sort of clear intentions off that. So yeah, I'm being quite conservative until that, sort of only waiting for sort of the super high probability POIs, decent entry models, and then hopefully next week following NFP we'll have sort of clearer direction to work with. But if you have any questions on, guys, just drop me a message in one of the channels and I will get back to you. Thanks for listening, guys. Goodbye.